Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Discussing Film Newscast. We, as always, have a great episode for you. We have some massive acquisitions happening in the film world. We have some Dune news. We have some J.J. Abrams stuff, the Powerpuff Girls, and I'll not hint too much to it, but there's some news for me this week. We had Muppets the last few episodes. We've got some news for me this week. So listen to find out about that. As always, I am Michael Slavin, one of your co-hosts, and I'm joined, as always, by Beatrin Shahzad.
For our first piece of news today, it was originally suggested that we cover it when it was a rumor by one of our followers, @MM_SW, SW probably standing for Star Wars. They said that we should talk about the Amazon MGM acquisition. It was rumored that it was going to be acquired for $9 billion, and they announced that they are going to try and acquire it for $8.4 billion. So if you don't know how these acquisition works, the studios will announce that they've come to this agreement, but they just have to wait for the government to look at the deal and sign it off. So that's what they're waiting for at this point, is for the government to be like, okay, you're not a monopoly. So that's what's happening. And Amazon said they're very excited, and from what they've said, it sounds kind of like they just want it for its IPs, and the only IP it really has or has relied on in the last few years is like James Bond, and maybe Addams Family.
I think mainly James Bond, though. More
Yes.
so than the Addams Family.
So, what are your thoughts about this acquisition?
Hate it. Hate it. Hate it. Hate it. Hate it. I hate it.
Okay.
There's also
Good
the
talk.
Rocky franchise.
Oh,
So the Creed movies.
okay.
No, yeah, but with the Amazon, I think that Amazon don't need more power to control. I'm very aware that this is a film podcast, so I don't want to go too deep into my opinions on Amazon, but I generally think that it is a real worry with Amazon going this deep into the film industry and what it means for the future of it as an industry. And so this deal acquiring MGM, which is one of, if not the traditional most respected movie studios, with
Yeah, it's 97 years old.
yeah, with IPs like Rocky, like James Bond, I just doesn't sit right, and it feels awful. I don't like it. I do not think this is a good piece of news. But it's a big piece of
Yeah.
news, so we got to talk about it.
It is a big piece of news. I think that because Amazon has enough power and resources that they could make any movie they want, and
Yeah.
the IPs that MGM has, aren't substantial enough for them to, fight over. They're definitely doing it for, the namesake, to be like, we are now an established part of Hollywood,
Yeah.
which it is what it is, I guess.
Because I do think that people quite often do forget that, when they're talking about the streaming wars, for example, and people being like, but Amazon doesn't quite have the pull as these other companies, and it's like, yes, but Amazon could buy all the rest of these companies 10 times over. They are one of the biggest conglomerates in the world. I've thought of a positive spin on this. I've done it. I thought of it. MGM produced Invincible movie.
Oh. Okay.
MGM James
I hope
Bond
for you.
crossover. Seth Rogen,
Yeah.
we're getting you that check, baby.
Because I'm not a big fan of the movies MGM has put out recently, but MGM is the treasure trove of golden age classical movies. A lot of classical musicals came out of MGM. So when it got acquired, my first thought was oh no, the musicals. But I don't think that was they didn't acquire the rights to those. They're still with Warner Brothers. So the classics are safe. I don't think they have the rights to like Wizard of Oz.
Yeah,
which,
or like Ben-Hur or...
Yeah, which that makes me feel a little bit better. That I won't have to go to Amazon Prime to watch The Wizard of Oz.
Well, no, that's the thing though. With this is actually something that's been discussed a lot in the last week or so on Twitter, if not longer, where it's looking at different streaming services and their back catalogue going past like the 90s and how it's almost non-existent. And I think the sad reality would have been, thankfully, if you're saying I haven't actually looked into this, but if you're saying I'll believe you, they don't have access to their older films. But Amazon would not probably put that onto Prime. They would probably just kind of keep them in a vault somewhere so that they can release special editions of them, or be able to say, oh, we're bringing this on, and then delete it a week later. I do not have faith in Amazon as a company to recognize the huge responsibility which comes with taking over a brand that has the legacy of MGM. So, yeah.
Yeah, because if you want to talk about like physical media and the preservation of physical media, everyone's worried that since things are going digital, we're going to lose all of that stuff. We're going to lose like physical media, and everything's just going to be, you know, basically up to like the whims of the overlords. Like you won't be able to own like a CD of your favorite things, and they don't get like remastered as much and then released physically. So,
and that's Amazon's whole business plan. Amazon's whole business plan is everything is online. You go to a Amazon grocery store and you don't have to speak to anyone. There's no physical experience. It is entirely you put everything in your basket. You use an app. Everything is online. Audible, everything is online. So in terms of respect of physical media and any rights that Amazon will have, it's very, very worrying.
Yes. I know you mentioned between all the streaming services, the streaming service with the biggest back catalog is HBO Max. And that's because HBO Max has the Turner Classic Movie Catalog. The Turner Classic Movie Catalog is owned by Warner Brothers. And Warner Brothers, and those are the MGM classics that Warner Brothers has. So that's why that's part of the reason HBO's like backup is so big. But yeah, speaking of Warner Media, that brings us to our next acquisition move.
Sure.
Next acquisition news, AT&T basically announced that like Warner Media is gonna like branch off and merge with Discovery for $43 billion. I think either they're merging together, and I think to create their own like little company, and it's not gonna be like oversighted by
Warner
AT&T.
Discovery, I believe.
Yes.
I'll look for the exact name whilst you continue to talk. What do you think for this piece of news?
It makes me a little sad. Because I think Discovery is like a nice brand. Not like a nice brand, but I feel like they're relatively like good at what they do and the content they produce. And Warner Media definitely has its ups and downs, but I think it's also a fairly strong brand. But the fact that like Netflix and Disney have gotten so big that studios feel that they need to like, just to compete, they have to merge together and like synergize their brands when there's like not much synergy is like kind of sad.
Yeah, I've looked up. It's Warner Bros. Discovery, the stuff that dreams are made of, and they've released a logo that is it's real bad. It's really, really bad. There's no other way to discuss it other than just saying that it is awful. It's boring. It's uninventive. It would have probably taken like, I think that with no assets and just working off memory, I could make this logo on Photoshop in like 5-10 minutes, and I'm really dumb, and I'm not great with Photoshop at all. So that's a great sign for the it's a great sign for the merging of these two companies and how that's going to go going forward.
What was they going to do? What are they going to... Because I'm looking at what they have now. Discovery has, like, Animal Planet, TLC, and the Discovery Channel, which are all, like, reality TV channels. TLC is probably, like, trashy reality TV. Animal Planet is, like, Animal Planet. And then Discovery Channel is, like, I don't know, science TV. And then Warner Brothers is, like, Game of Thrones, Harry Potter, DC. Like, how do they connect? How is the synergy going to work? I don't know, but apparently it was worth $43 billion.
Yep. That's all I really have to say on it. I think that until we find out more about how it's actually going to work logistically, it's just a weird thing that has happened that we need to acknowledge because it is huge. But we can't really say too much until we know more in terms of what this actually means. Like, is it Warner Media absorbing Discovery? Is it the opposite? Or is it a genuine merger?
I think that what most people are, like, concerned about is that there are a lot of people who are not very happy with how Warner Media handles its properties, which, whatever. But I think a lot of people, like, blame that on AT&T, and I'm not sure why. So I think that they're hoping that if there's a distance from AT&T, Warner won't suck as much. I guess. I don't know. Or even if they, like, merge with Discovery, I'm not sure how, like, the fact that they're under the same umbrella as, like, Animal Planet will help with Warner's IPs. But, you know, we'll see what happens. Like, this is so bizarre. Imagine if just, like, the guy who's in charge of Animal Planet suddenly becomes in charge of, like, DC Comics, and he's like, yeah, I know how to fix this. I know how to fix your cinematic universe. Speaking of fixing a cinematic universe, do you want to hear the next one?
Fire. She is on fire today. So with the next one, Denis Villeneuve's Dune is set to debut at the Venice Film Festival, as well as The French Dispatch by Wes Anderson, which is set to premiere at the Cannes Film Festival. Now, whilst The French Dispatch is not surprising, like, Wes Anderson is critics to the extreme. Like, they are critics' films, and they are beloved. Dune, however, debuting at a film festival, I don't know. It's kind of a bit spicy. It's very exciting, I think. It's really interesting news.
I'm gonna say one thing that's gonna just completely mess up your whole...
Don't make me sad.
I will. Joker debuted at the Venice Film Festival, and it won the Golden Lion there.
Don't say that.
But that's what happens. That's what happened, Michael.
But, like, people liked Joker. I didn't like Joker, but people liked Joker. You know?
Yeah, it did make $1 billion.
They say.
Yes. But I think that if we're looking at this in terms of, like, oh, it's, like, more of, like, a sci-fi movie, you know, like, out of the realm of what we'd usually expect to see premiere at a film festival. Like, Joker was kind of the same way. And it succeeded. So...
I mean, The French Dispatch is following the footsteps of Shrek, which premiered at the Cannes Film Festival. So, you know. Only goats.
If only it was as good as Shrek.
We don't know, but it will not be as good as Shrek. Although, right, I will say now, I will watch any film that covers journalism. So factor in Wes Anderson to that. I'm very excited for The French Dispatch. But I'd say the more interesting of these two is the fact that it's Dune. And whilst I take your point that you can look at it as, oh, this is interesting because a more sci-fi mainstream film is debuting at the Venice Film Festival, you can also look at it a different way, which is that perhaps this hints to the fact that Dune will be more than a regular sci-fi film, and that it will potentially be an awards contender, and that's how they're sort of viewing this film. So I find that quite interesting, actually, and it makes me more excited for the film. And even though you're trying to ruin my day, I won't let you.
I'm not trying to ruin anything. I'm just simply reminding you of the truth.
This film has Dave Bautista, which means we have the potential for Dave Bautista in small glasses, which is the sign of any great film.
That's your opinion. I'm sorry to say that I do not share.
Coward. Speaking of
Coward?
great films,
Realistic.
speaking of films, J.J. Abrams has been speaking recently about the sequel trilogy. And I think it's important off the bat to say our opinions on the sequel trilogy. I think the first two are really good. I think that the last one is awful. What do you think?
I like the first one the best. That's all I can really say.
Okay. It's just important to note before we sort of talk about this piece of news. Because if you think one way, you see this news very differently to if you think another way.
Okay,
Because
I will say though, I am a J.J. Abrams defender.
Okay,
you can read the quote now.
Okay. So J.J. Abrams came out and has suggested that the sequel trilogy might have been better with a plan. Then this is the quote saying, "Having a plan, I learned, in some cases the hard way, is the most critical thing, because otherwise you don't know what you're setting up." I think that whilst I love The Force Awakens and I love The Last Jedi as an individual film, I think it is noticeable that there was not a plan, because every film almost decided to act entirely by itself and set up its own stuff. And there's a lot of stuff that they just never answered, or they answered in very unsatisfactory ways in The Rise of Skywalker. And perhaps if they'd gone with Colin Trevorrow's original script, there are real issues with that story, and a lot of it's very weird. It does, for those who don't know, Colin Trevorrow's script is actually out there. There's a really great video by Mr. Sunday Movies where he sort of recaps the whole thing. But it feels like that was a more natural sequel to what sort of happened. So yeah. So now I've spoken, I'm going to pass over to Bean.
Okay. J.J. Abrams defender here.
Right.
I will not be defending J.J. Abrams other than saying, okay, I'll be defending him a little bit.
So you like
he
The
should
Rise
have
of
had a plan.
Skywalker?
Okay, he should have had a plan. It's obvious from The Rise of Skywalker. Like,
think?
I can look at The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker together, and I can detail why they made every single poorly made decision that they did based on, like, not only critical reception, but trying to fix the trajectory of the movies. Because and the thing I like about J.J. Abrams is that he's made a lot of movies I don't like, but I think he does have a love for filmmaking, and I do think that he can, like, accept when he's wrong. Okay?
As he has here, because he
has
wrong.
here.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think when the movie first came out in an interview, he also talked about something he did wrong and something he recognizes that's wrong with The Rise of Skywalker. So I feel like people, like, blaming J.J. Abrams for, like, every terrible thing that's happened with Star Wars, but, like,
well, it's more than him, though. Like,
Yes.
I think that it's inherently weird that from the off, the plan was always 3 different directors for the 3 different films. And I don't know if it would have been any better if it was 3 of the same director, or if it was J.J. Abrams and then 2 by Rian Johnson or whatever. But I think that you're always going to be disjointed from the off when you have 3 directors who are all so different. Like, how... If you watch The Force Awakens and then watch The Last Jedi, whilst I love them both individually, it's so clear that both filmmakers saw what Star Wars is and was so differently. And so it shouldn't really be a surprise that their stories were then disjointed when sort of shoved together.
Okay. I'm going to spit my Star Wars analysis here. So,
news podcast.
I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm going to make this quick. So the
Mhm.
original trilogy, when George Lucas made it, was very clearly going to follow the hero's journey. And even the big, like, surprise in the middle of the second movie, Luke, I am your father, it's still, like, narratively, as spoiler alert, Darth Vader's Luke's father. But narratively, like, as a thematic thing, it very much followed the hero's journey, the underdog. So he didn't need a plan. Like, sure, Luke kisses his sister, but it's not very impactful when looking at the themes, the characters, like, the world you've built.
That's
like,
also,
he always knew
the original
where it was going to end.
I was just
Yes.
saying the original plan was going to be slightly different. It was going to be that she wasn't his sister, I believe. So that's why that happened. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that, like, you have that flexibility in that narrative because you
Yes.
know where the story is going to end. You know how a hero's
Yes.
journey story ends. So you have that flexibility. The prequel trilogy, then again, was subversive. It was a corruption arc, but then also, again, you knew where it ended. So you didn't have to make a plan all the way through because you knew where it ended. The problem with the sequel trilogy is that J.J. Abrams went into it thinking, and he created something that was very reminiscent of A New Hope. And then when Rian Johnson came in, he wanted to create something more subversive. So it was two opposite, like, they both thought it was going to end in a different place, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's important to, like, have a plan for all your movies, but I think it's important for everyone to know how the movie ends. Because when we talk about the MCU, yes, they track every single thing, and I always compare Star Wars to the MCU. I always say, oh, if the sequel trilogy was better planned out for the MCU, it would have been better. But I don't necessarily think that's true anymore. I think that they should have known how the sequel trilogy was going to end from the get-go. And then they should have given the directors the creative license to get to that destination, and they should have had more communication. I think it should have been more of a collaborative effort, because I don't think that you needed a plan, but you needed an idea of the story you were going to tell and how the characters were going to fit into that story. And they were just, like, writing. They weren't, like, storytelling, you know?
Yes. Okay. I agree with a lot of the things you're saying. So from one absolute mess to another. The Powerpuff.
I'm sorry, JJ.
The Powerpuff Girls. We're moving on. The Powerpuff Girls. This is the hard-hitting news that you come to Discussing Film for. So the Powerpuff Girls reboot is having to be redone because the pilot sucks. And the quote is, "The reason we do the pilot is sometimes things miss. This was just a miss. We believe in the cast, we believe in Diablo and Heather. In this case, the pilot didn't work." Now, when talking about news, you obviously have to verify sources. And it's important to say that this is fairly unverified, but there are things indicating it's true. There was a leak of the script that occurred, and when it was removed, the reason given was that it was removed for copyright reasons, which indicates that it's true. But it is important to take this with a pinch of salt and just kind of look at this piece of news and go, well, maybe, generally, whatever the script is, Powerpuff Girls, but they're Riverdale, not a great concept. But did you happen to see the leaked script?
I did, Michael.
Oh, it's real bad. It's really, really bad.
Okay, I'm going to ask, between the two of us, who watches more of the CW?
You? I've watched more Riverdale, but you watch more of the CW.
The fact that I've seen Smallville and Supernatural alone, that's 25 seasons of content I've seen from the CW.
Yes, but I do think that the Powerpuff Girls is going much more for a Riverdale vibe than it is Smallville.
Oh, it definitely was. Okay. First, okay. Yes. I have watched Riverdale, though. And I've seen Riverdale-esque shows. I saw Sabrina, like the chaotic Adventures of Sabrina, which was in partnership with the CW and Netflix.
So what did you think of the script then? And can you give a brief summary of why it's awful?
It's awful because it reads like a late Riverdale script. Like, they very much, like, sexualized the Powerpuff Girls, and it was, like, campy, but just not in, like, a very funny way. So I think that they're going to try and kind of strip it down and just make it less cringe, if that makes sense.
I think that that's what they should do. I don't know if that's what they're going to do because they greenlit this in the first place.
Listen, if the reason it's staying is because it has the cast it has. It got like Chloe Bennett and Dove Cameron, so they're not gonna throw away them.
Faison.
Yeah.
Faison? I don't know.
Yeah. So they're not gonna throw away that cast. But
No.
what I'm worried about is that there are two camps of CW shows. There's the light, funny, campy CW shows, and then there are the dark, gritty CW shows, and then there are the ones that like kind of ride that line. And I would much rather have a lighthearted, campy Powerpuff Girls, even if it's cringe, than have like a dark Powerpuff Girls. So I'm afraid that they're gonna swing too dark in the remake, because I would rather have this than whatever is coming if they're gonna do that.
Well, it's like with the bits of the script that were leaked, not only does it feature a lot of words that Bean won't let me say, which just I know that the original target demographic of the Powerpuff Girls have since grown up. They're still children's characters. It's still weird.
You're saying that like you don't watch Riverdale.
Yeah, but I hate Riverdale.
Then why do you watch it?
Right. This is right. I watch Riverdale for a very specific reason, and I've told you this multiple times.
Okay, whatever. We don't have to get into this now.
No,
but also,
I'm explaining
I could say
now. I watch because I have to defend myself. I watch Riverdale once every like 4 to 6 episodes to try and figure out what's going on, and I use it as the mystery isn't whatever mystery they're trying to solve. The mystery is what is the plot, because it goes in such random directions every few episodes. That's why I watch Riverdale. The part that I was going to talk about was the fact that not only are they swearing in the Powerpuff Girls, they've taken their father, a character who was loving and sweet and supportive in the original show when he was white, and now he's being played by a black actor. They have turned him into a abusive sex pest who is a horrible father. And I think that if you don't recognize how weird that is, do some research, because that's incredibly weird, and I don't like it.
I think I admit now that I've never seen the Powerpuff Girls.
I'm gonna beat you. Coming for me like this, or like, oh, well, have you watched the CW? You've not even watched the show we're talking about.
There's not much to gather. They're Powerpuff Girls. They're sassies.
Hasn't seen the Powerpuff Girls.
I've seen a scene from the Powerpuff Girls. That's all you need to know. Because the Powerpuff Girls is consistent in what it creates every single time. Meanwhile, the CW has a plethora, a range of what you can expect from it. And people like to single that down into like a single-minded, oh, this is what we can expect from the CW. But no, it's different every time. It's the same kind of bad, but it's a different bad. And if you haven't watched it, you can't understand that. I've suffered in like 25 different flavors based on what TV show I'm watching, just because they're all bad in different ways, but all bad in the same way.
That's your fault for watching them then. Why are you blaming me?
I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just explaining.
Look, I think that generally, if you have to reshoot a full pilot after you've already released promotional photos, and after there have been leaked set photos of them in their outfits, I don't think that's a good sign. I think we will. You're right that with the cast and with the amount of like the sunk cost fallacy of how much they've probably committed to this already, we'll get a season of it. But I think it's going to be really, really bad. And I think that we'll only get one because it's going to be really, really bad.
You're wrong. I know for sure you're wrong. Do you know why? Because no matter how bad it is, people are going to watch it. And then it's going to get renewed. People said the same thing about Riverdale. What season is Riverdale on right now?
Riverdale season 1's good. I'll die on that hill.
What season is Riverdale on?
I believe 4.
I thought it was more than that. Hasn't it been renewed to 6?
I mean, it's been renewed, but I thought you were asking about what it has actually released.
You know, I'm just saying. People say the same thing about Riverdale. Every single time a good TV show gets canceled.
Season 5. It's on season 5.
Yeah. So every single time a good show gets canceled, people turn around and be like, Riverdale's still on air? That's because people watch Riverdale. And you know what? A lot of people are going to watch the Powerpuff Girls reboot. A lot of people will. I don't even think it has to be good.
I don't think it's going to be good.
I'm not even going to argue because I know time will be on my side.
We'll see. So, whilst this is sort of bad news, but it's like quite lighthearted, we're actually moving on to slightly less lighthearted news. This is actually really worrying and disturbing. So, Hannah Waddingham, who was a cast member on Game of Thrones, she was the nun who was part of the sort of iconic scene of Cersei going through King's Landing and everyone chanting shame at her, and she then later featured in a scene in which Cersei got her revenge, and Hannah Waddingham's character was waterboarded and sort of tied down, and she came out and said that Game of Thrones actually did that to her. And she was waterboarded for 10 hours during that sequence, saying that other than childbirth, it was the worst day of her life. How does this happen? Like, how?
Yeah, it's straight up unacceptable.
It's horrendous.
There's not even much to say other than the fact that studios still think that they can get away with this is really gross. And we shouldn't even be having this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other detail which really, really messed me up when I was reading it was she said how after the fact she ran into the director, who I believe it was like a second unit day or something like that. She ran into the director of the episode, who was like, "Oh, I hear we waterboarded you today. That's wild." So they were... Like, there was something this huge was happening, and they were fully unaware of it, or they pretended they weren't aware of it, which is far more insidious. But I think something like this doesn't happen in isolation. Like, it's not one bad thing happens on a show, and you hear about that one thing straight away. I would be very worried as to other things that have potentially happened on Game of Thrones if they allowed this to happen. Like, if the apparatus wasn't in place to stop something like this from happening, I would be shocked if this is the only time that something awful happened on that show.
Yeah, no, for sure, because the scope of Game of Thrones was, like, so big.
And it was so many scenes that had to be dealt with such delicacy if they were to be done right.
Yeah. I mean... just the amount of, like, sexual assault that, like, scenes that happen, like, I can promise you that it wasn't probably a good situation for any of the women involved, especially if, like, they clearly, like, don't care about the comfort of their actors.
She also said that that scene could have been worse because the original script was going to have her being violated by the Mountain, who was the undead knight in that scene, blah, blah, blah. He was going to force himself on her, but that was cut not because that's a horrendous scene and just awful back to front, but it was just that there was a bad reaction to one of those scenes in the previous season, so they cut it. But that is just
wow.
That is just like, if that hadn't been cut on top of the 10 hours of waterboarding, oh my god.
No, that's like a straight up, like, that would be a traumatic situation. Just imagine being literally tortured Because at that point, you wouldn't be able to really tell, like, what's real and what's not.
She said that since that happened, she's been in situations with water, and she hasn't actually realized until a while after that she has, like, a fear of water and a claustrophobia around it now. So yeah, I think that this should. One of the big reasons we've included this is we've reported this at Discussing Film, and it came out in an interview with her, but I really don't think this has been reported enough, and I really think this is a really big piece of news because it is just horrific, and they shouldn't be able to get away with this.
Yes, very unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. Right, so there's with these kind of news, it's always awkward to sort of move on. So we're just going to move on to the next piece of news, but we do want to sort of make aware of these sort of stories where people are being mistreated, because it is really important. But moving on to the next piece of news, Quiet Place 2 came out this week, and it's done really, really surprisingly well with such a sort of stilted release. I really wasn't expecting it to do well at all, to the point where I remember just pre-lockdown starting in the UK, there were screenings for A Quiet Place 2. So it was that close to release just as the pandemic hit. And they've timed it really well with when they're releasing it, and it made 57 million in a 4-day domestic box office opening weekend, which is obviously for pre-pandemic numbers, it's not very high, but is the absolute highest during the pandemic, and it's a really astounding number, I think. What do you make of that?
Movie theaters are coming back, baby. You see a lot on, like, social media. People are like, oh, I'm going to my movie theater. There's, like, people here. There's a line at the movie theater.
I'm going back to the movie theater this week at some point. I don't know yet for what, but I'm going back for the first time since Tenet, I think.
Yeah. I haven't been to a movie theater since I watched Onward.
I lie. I think I saw Soul. I saw Soul. I saw Soul after Tenet because I remember wearing a mask to watch Soul. But yeah, that was the last film that I watched, and that was pre-December, so it wasn't. That was a while ago. It's really exciting.
Yes, because where I live in California, throughout this entire pandemic, movie theaters were only open 1 week before they released. They opened, because you know how Regal closed down, and Regal was like, "Oh, I'm not opening until theaters in LA open again." So, until the Regal movie theaters decided to open back up, that's when everything else in California decided to open back up. Yeah, movie theaters were only open for 1 week. So I didn't even have the option of going at all. And I don't know when I'm going to go again, but I am fully vaccinated, and I'm very excited. I want to walk down that aisle again.
I just want
I'm so excited.
I just want what you have. I just want one vaccine. One vaccine would be nice. Just one jab. Alas, that's not film news, so it's irrelevant, useless. Quiet Place has made a lot of money. Good for John Krasinski and Emily Blunt. Good for them.
Mr. and Mrs. Fantastic?
Don't.
No, that's a joke, because I'm Reed Richards in the Fantastic Four. This is a formal news announcement. I'm playing Reed Richards.
Okay.
Anyways, talking about other Marvel casting news besides me.
We have SPUMC news.
Reed Richards. Yes. Aaron Taylor Johnson is going to be in the Kraven the Hunter movie that will release January 13th, 2023.
That's not a real date. I don't believe that. That's not a real date.
Well, get over yourself. Yeah. I didn't even know they were making a Kraven the Hunter movie. I didn't know that there's going to be a Sinister Six-verse.
Well, yeah, they're doing this character. There have been hints this week where they've spoken about how the SPUMC.
Wait, we should explain who Kraven the Hunter is first. I think
Spider-Man villain.
He's a spider. Yes.
Who hunts people. He's does what he says on the tin. But yeah, they've given some hints this week to there being more crossovers between the MCU and the Sony, the Sony universe, the Venomverse, the Morbius and his boys. They've hinted to the fact that even in No Way Home, there are going to be some links to that. There's obviously Morbius, which has Michael Keaton's Vulture in it. There's been nothing said yet as to how this will cross over, but maybe we'll get to see Aaron Taylor Johnson back in the MCU. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Because they've shown with Gemma Chan that they just don't really, if a person's a good enough actor, they don't really care about just recasting them.
Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna be honest, never a big fan of Kraven the Hunter. I'm not excited about this at all, but...
Well, I think it's pretty neat.
I mean, I feel like if they announced this 5 years ago, people would be like, him as Kraven the Hunter? But then after Tenet came out, everyone's like, yeah, this is a great choice.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a real Kick-Ass fan, so I will always go to bat for Aaron Taylor Johnson because I think that those movies are great and he is like a core part in that. Yeah,
I'm just saying, like, physically he changed a lot. Like, he looks very different.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
They apparently offered the role to Keanu Reeves, which I find it interesting that, like, age-wise, it clearly was quite flexible because Keanu Reeves, Aaron Taylor Johnson, bit of a disparity there in age. But I find Aaron Taylor Johnson a more interesting casting for the role anyway. So,
I mean, I think that people in Hollywood just make exceptions for Keanu Reeves.
This is true.
I feel like they just ignore his age because I feel like John Wick should have just been played by someone younger. Like, his age isn't important to that. Or...
Maybe.
Yeah. Or when he was considered for... He was considered for Doctor Strange, right? So...
He was considered. I think it was between... Yeah. It was between him, Joaquin Phoenix, and Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yeah, he's older than the rest of them, so I'm saying that they, like, even though he's on the older side, I think that
I see your point.
Yeah.
So from one Marvel character to another, Denai Guerrero has been reported by The Hollywood Reporter to be returning as OKOYE in an Origin spin-off series for Disney+. Look, people always joke about, like, oh, whenever I'm out, the MCU drags me in. I'm a real shill, so I'm like, I'm always all in. But, like, can you get me more in than a Dora Milaje movie? Or Dora Milaje series, sorry. That is so cool. Please do that. That's such a cool idea.
I think it's going to be even better because it's going to be an origin movie. So it's going to be taking place, like, solely within, like, Wakanda or, like, Wakanda before it got more involved with the MCU. So I think that that's just something we need to see.
Wakandan
because as cool as the MCU is, yes, Wakandan society, like, before they, did their thing. Before the events of Black Panther.
I was listening to someone speak earlier this week about world building and how when people think of world building, they think of Lord of the Rings, they think of, like, maps and places, but how culture and, like, small details are such a unappreciated part of world building. And I think the world building of Black Panther is genuinely masterful. Like, all the visual cues between the different tribes, the small traditions that they have that are deeply rooted in African culture. I think that Wakanda is a society that the MCU, if they're smart, will do a lot more to explore, and I think that this is one of the coolest ways they can do that. As with anything, you do have to give it the caveat of how do they approach a potential Dora Milaje spin-off without Chadwick Boseman, but I'm sure that they have sort of discussed that at length, and all the murmurs seem to be that they're being fairly respectful with them not using any CGI for Black Panther 2 or recasting him. But yeah, that's just something to keep in mind, I guess. But
I
very
honestly
exciting.
don't think it would be terribly hard to have an origin without the King of Wakanda in it. I feel like TV shows do that all the time. Like, TV shows do that all the time, not even because he's passed away, but just because it's such a big actor, they can't afford to bring them in.
Yeah.
So they just write around it.
I suppose they could also just sort of do... They could just have his father who played T'Chaka, because time-wise that would probably line up more, and just have like a T'Challa's on a mission.
So true.
So, on to the next piece of news. I'm so excited. I'm so excited. So, as we discussed last week, Bean's got to talk about the Muppets for ages, and now it's my turn. My Muppet is sports. Because for people who know me, as well as being a big film fan, I'm a big sports fan and a big football fan within that. And there's sports news this week, Bean. Sports.
Hey, have your moment. Go have it. I'm here. I'm waiting.
You always ask me about the Muppets. Like, what's your opinions on football? Do you know much? Like, do you know much about this piece of news?
Explain it to me, and I'll form an opinion while you're speaking.
I'd like to clarify that she asked me to explain, so I'm not mansplaining football to her. I'd like to make that very clear. So.
It's because you Go.
So, producer Adrian Butchart came out and did an interview. Well, he didn't quite do an interview. He's spoken to the Mirror quite clearly, and so the Mirror got an exclusive where they released the news that Robert Pattinson, Zac Efron, and Louis Tomlinson were set to play Premier League striker Jamie Vardy in a biopic. So this biopic has been spoken about for ages because the dude's just interesting. Like, he's very weird, he's very funny, and his story is like... It's the kind of thing that if you wrote into a generic sports story, you'd call it unrealistic and, like, cheesy. But he... See, he was released from, like, academies at 16 and then worked his way up from playing in non-league for £100 a week, where he was working part-time in a factory building splints for prosthetic legs. He then worked his way up from there, and then at, like, 25, I believe it was, he moved to Leicester. Leicester then got promoted and went through this, like, fairy tale story of coming, like, 18th in the league one season and then winning the league the next season with Jamie Vardy as their, like, talismanic striker. He went on to play for England. It's an amazing story. This is really exciting. Have I sold the story? Have I sold the tale of Jamie Vardy to you?
Honestly, as someone who's not into sports, it sounds like every other sports movie.
But that's the thing. It's a true story.
It is true. I've also seen Disney Channel original movies that are sports movies that are true stories and that are just as interesting.
But you like those. So
I do like those. I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying it sounds the same as everything else. Which, that's not a bad thing. It's just what it is. I'll probably watch it, though.
I'll force you to.
Is that a microaggression? Vote now on your phones.
No, it's a macroaggression.
No, misogyny at work.
No, stop it. Jamie Vardy biopic is really exciting because, again, there are a bunch of, like, mini stories of the fact that whilst a Premier League footballer, his, like, pre-match ritual was, like, he'd eat really unhealthy food and, like, down Red Bull before a match and stuff like that. And there are just tons of, like, little details. And look, it can go one of two ways. If they cast Robert Pattinson, he has the look for Jamie Vardy. He could quite easily play him. That's really exciting. Zac Efron, great actor. Doesn't quite have the look, doesn't quite have the accent, but, like, you know, great actor. And I'm not going to say anything about Louis Tomlinson as an actor because One Direction fans scare me.
I mean, you've never seen him act in anything.
Exactly, so he could be really good. He could be.
He could be.
He could be. They're good friends. Louis Tomlinson and Jamie Vardy. Jamie Vardy. I think Louis Tomlinson.
Oh, that's probably really good. Like I could act like you probably in a biopic of your movie.
Sure.
Yeah, it's all about like the amount of time we spend together. I know you're like little.
He sung at Jamie Vardy's wedding, and that was his first time ever performing as a solo artist after One Direction.
How do you know this?
I know things.
You don't know when Zayn left One Direction.
This is true. But I know this thing because it's related to a sports thing.
I guess. Sounds like you're obsessed with this guy. I'm very happy
Jamie
for you
Vardy.
that you're getting...
Yes, I am.
Yes. If that wasn't obvious.
So from one piece of news that I'm obsessed with to the next, we have more The Last of Us news. Heyo! Are you excited?
Every single time you ask, and every single time I'm like, yeah, sure.
Look, I've spent the last week writing an essay about The Last of Us for university, so I've been thinking about this for hours on end. So you give me a piece of The Last of Us news, and I'm going to go feral. And this...
Are you going to talk about this for hours on end?
No.
Okay. Proceed.
So Merle Dandridge, the voice actor and general actor for Marlene in HBO's The Last of Us, is reprising her role for the HBO series, which is interesting because up until this point, they didn't cast Ashley Johnson as Ellie because she's too old. They didn't cast Nolan North as Joel, which, you know, would have worked, but maybe a bit old, who knows, but like, they didn't cast him. They haven't cast the actor for Tommy as Tommy, but they've cast Marlene as Marlene. So I think it's really interesting that like a video game actor is getting this chance to act in such a huge series. I think it's really cool that they're like staying respectful to the original game.
Very nice.
Yeah, it's cool. You don't seem excited. I'm sad now.
I'm smiling. You know, you can hear people's smiles over the phone. Yeah, you can hear people's smiles over the phone. Why'd you come at me for that? What the heck?
Because you just responded with, I'm smiling, and it's a podcast.
Yes, you can hear what people smile when they speak over the phone. That's like the first rule. Can't you hear me smiling right now, Michael? I'm smiling because of the
Only
Last
because
of
you're
Us
doing your customer
news.
Service voice.
That's not even my customer service voice.
You were doing close.
You want to hear my customer service?
No, please don't.
That's
I don't
close.
I don't want to hear you. I've heard it. I don't like it.
Anyways, last piece of information. Remember when Citizen Kane, they found a bad review of Citizen Kane on Rotten, and then they entered it into Rotten Tomatoes, and then literally like 75 years after the movie came out, they had to like lower Citizen Kane's 100% Rotten Tomatoes rating, and then everyone was like, "Oh my God, this doesn't mean Citizen Kane is the highest rated movie on Rotten Tomatoes anymore. Do you know what it is? It's Paddington 2."
Which
well,
also
Paddington
had
2.
100%.
Yes.
Yeah.
Paddington 2 just got Citizen Kaned. So they're both in the same boat now.
More like Citizen Pain. Oh.
Yep. They unearthed a review, a negative review, and now it's at 99.
So now Toy Story 2 is the highest rated film on Rotten Tomatoes. I hope you're happy, Citizen Kane. You couldn't let the nice bear just get a win.
I mean, I don't think Mr. Citizen Kane himself wrote the review.
I think that it's Mank's fault. I don't know how, I don't know why, but it feels like Mank's fault. It's got Gary Oldman's grubby little fingers all over it.
Oh my God. I just want to say Toy Story 2 is a good movie. So
It's a
I'm
very
glad
good
it's
movie.
something like Toy Story 2. Yeah.
It's not like it fell down to Joker, you know.
Yeah, so...
Which, if anyone asks, we love Joker. Don't
Yeah,
take this
just
episode
disregard-
as otherwise.
Yeah, disregard the first half of this podcast. Just listen to what we're saying now.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But I am furious. I feel a white hot fury for the disrespect found towards Paddington 2. I will find this reviewer. I'm going to leave it at that.
No. Paddington would not want this. He would not want you to resort to violence.
I didn't say what I was going to... I didn't say I was going to be violent. I'm going to give him the
Were
Paddington
you going to be violent,
stare.
Michael?
The Paddington stare.
I'm Paddington staring at you over the phone.
It's a podcast.
You can hear that in my voice too, right?
It's a podcast. You
Okay.
can't give away the fact... People... What do you mean over the phone? You can't... This is in person. Don't give it away.
Oh my god. You're talking about the fact that we're in different countries? We're also in the same place?
Metaphorically speaking.
Sure.
What? This podcast is devolving episode by episode. And I'm here for it, honestly.
You know what? That's up for our viewers to decide. Vote now on your phones.
Where are they voting?
I'll put the poll on the Twitter page. So now you can give... Michael's about to do our outro, and he's going to say what our Twitter page is. But I'm going to put these polls on the Twitter page. I'm going to leave them up for like the maximum amount of allotted time. And you can go and vote if what Michael said to me about forcing me to watch a football movie, or actually, no, frick Michael, a soccer movie. If forcing me to watch a soccer movie is a microaggression.
I'm going to edit that. I'm editing this one, so I'm editing that out.
No,
And
it was funny.
I told you it wasn't a microaggression, it was a macroaggression.
Let me. No, you have to keep it in.
I'm going to keep it in, you're fine. This is all going in. It's all because it's less work for me.
Anyways, so you get to vote about the microaggression versus the macroaggression, and then you get to vote about... What was the question?
It was about us.
Oh, if you like the fact that our attitudes are not devolving, we're getting more chaotic. Is this how you like your movie news? Because this is how we will deliver it to you. Namaste, God bless. Because I could do my customer service voice. I know that Michael can pull it together. But is that what you want?
Don't do your customer
Vote now on your phones.
Voice. Don't do your customer service voice, please. So here's the outro. We're doing the outro now. The podcast's finished. Go home. What are you still doing here? Oh, you want some socials. I'm gonna give you some socials. So I'm at MichaelSlaver98 on Twitter. Bean, would you like to give your at on Twitter? Change it up for once.
It's Bean, Beya Bean.
You should also follow at Discussing Film for all of the best film, TV, video game news, musicals if Bean steals the account details. As well as that, there are going to be loads of articles coming soon, including some on some of the topics that we've sort of discussed and continue to discuss every episode. And make sure, above all, to follow at DF Newscast on Twitter, to follow us on Spotify, to rate us on iTunes, to something on YouTube. Subscribe on YouTube, like on YouTube, all of that generic YouTuber insert smash the like button thing. Nice. We out.